Social media, as we know, has transformed how young people connect, create, and consume content. But we ask ourselves, at what cost? This next panel, moderated by Anthony Gordon, founder of Lighthouse Edutainment, brings together leading voices in this space to tackle one of the most pressing issues of our generation, and that is the impact of social media on mental health and the well-being of our young people. So please welcome to the stage Anthony Gordon and the brilliant panelists.
Okay, folks, welcome to the panel that was really the genesis of a collaboration between VidCon and Lighthouse Edutainment. Going back several months, the discussion I had with the VidCon leadership was every year, some of the most creative people come to Anaheim, California, but these are the same people that can be part of a solution to the biggest global pandemic that we are witnessing in our generation, which is largely a fallout of sort of social media addiction and the role that the algorithm plays in the lives of tens of millions of kids. So we're very honored to have assembled a board of all-stars who are well equipped to answer how we can protect the next generation, the health of Gen Z, and the connection with social media. So in no particular order. So Liz Swagard is the co-founder of Divine Video. We have Jen Libby, who is the founder and CEO of Promly. Mark Berkman, who's the CEO of the Organization for Social Media Safety. And Shelby, who works very closely with Jen and is just an all-round rock star.
100%.
So we know that we have a generation where hundreds of millions of people are walking around with a hypodermic needle with a screen in their pocket. What we're going to discuss today is a little bit about the fallout and more the solutions of what we can do so that we don't have hundreds of millions of people leading lives of quiet desperation. So perhaps, Mark, kick off. Just your thoughts on the statistics, the trends, the magnitude of the problem.
Yes, thank you for the question, Anthony. I think so we're talking about mental health in this panel, and there's a robust, substantial body of research showing that social media is driving adverse mental health outcomes. But I would also point out, as we talk about statistics, that we're not living in the theoretical. There is a long list of acute harms that are both severe and very pervasive, impacting millions of children across the globe, to be clear, and dangers like sexual predation, human trafficking, drug trafficking, cyberbullying, social media motivated violence, among many other harms. And the statistics tell a very clear story of how concerned we should all be here. Cyberbullying, we find in our research in partnership with UCLA School of Education, we find about 47% of 5th through 12th graders are being cyberbullied over social media. That triples the risk of suicide. There was a recent nationally representative survey at about 58% of teens. That's a shocking number. Another study found 25% of teens are being directly marketed illicit drugs. Thorne just came out with a study showing 20% of teens have been extorted. 1 in 7 of those teens have engaged in a form of self-harm because of that sextortion. NCMEC just came out with their numbers showing over 500,000 children as victims of online sexual enticement. That is almost exclusively happening over social media. We are short on time, and I could keep going, but there is a long list of these harms showing very acute, very severe, very real danger, and we have a collective responsibility to protect our children from these harms.
Amazing, Mark. I want to just put something in context so that we understand how this panel started, how this overriding thesis started. So for about 3.5, 4 years, I was the strategic advisor to Jimmy Donaldson, aka Mr. Beast. Our target audience was Gen Z. So I sort of got a front row seat to a generation that's in a lot of trouble. And when you're speaking to these kids and they develop a relationship, they tell you how anxious and how stressed they are. I want to try and make this as practical as possible. So, Jen, besides everything else, as a therapist, a question that I'm asked by parents often is, how do I know if these are sort of normal teenage behavior, or if this is a signal of a bigger problem? Because the last 18 months, my kid's been locked in a room with a hoodie over their head watching this little screen.
So interesting you say that, and I totally agree with a lot of the things that you say, but I also will say there's a lot of other things in addition to social media that we look at that are also contributing to the youth mental health crisis. So I want to also point that out as well, and certainly we could get into that in a lot of different ways. One of the things people often say, and they parents are saying, well, when is it a problem, right? And sometimes they say every kid is going to be addicted to social media. That's not actually true. And what we know from the research is that when we look at the individual brains of kids, some kids are going to be more dopamine addicted, let's say, or dopamine dependent than other kids. And you may not know that as a parent, or you may know that as a parent, but not every kid is going to be at the same risk level, right? So that's important. And honestly, there's been so many advancements with precision medicine and genetics and how we actually interpret how the brain actually metabolizes certain chemicals, including dopamine. So just keep that in mind. But when you say, what are the risk factors? Of course, when a kid's isolating, right? When a kid's not able to communicate, when they look more anxious, more depressed. And it's interesting, kids will say themselves, I know, listen, I'm a huge fan of Gen Z. I'm a huge fan of the alphas behind them. I think these kids are actually super savvy. And many times they're the ones saying, I know I have a problem. Like, seriously, I'm unhinged at this point. And so I find they may not say that to their parents, but they do say that to their friends. And I'm very hopeful because I'm seeing kids actually kind of self-regulate more in the last year or two than I've seen in the last 5 years. Kids are looking for better solutions.
Yep.
So I say it like, yes, the obvious things, but we're on the precipice of what I think is actually very hopeful with this generation having the awareness that they have.
And perhaps a good segue from that is that I speak to a lot of families that are saying, we want to come up with internal guidelines in our family, right? So perhaps for you, Liz, if you could come up with 3 rules for just healthy technology use for the average family.
Well, thank you for that, because that is where my research has sat. And what I would say is pause, reflect, redirect. And here's what I mean by that. First, a shout out to another neurotransmitter, cortisol. When we are having a stress response, when we are shocked, when one of our teens, one of my daughters, finds something on the internet she knows she's not supposed to see, there's this stress response. And when that happens, it is very hard to make a good decision. You go into this panic mode. And how do we regulate ourselves? First, how do we calm down? Because as parents, I can speak to this, my rush to punish, my rush to stop isn't because I'm mad at my kid, it's because I'm kind of mad at me. I want to protect her from everything. And so the first rule I would give is to help us as adults to pause and help us to help our youth to pause in that moment. And that moment of self-regulation, of deep breathing, centering is important because that's what sets up all the rest of the conversation. And that's where you get to the reflection bit. And it is so much more valuable to co-navigate with your teens than it is to surveil them. Surveillance leads to all the behaviors we don't want, hiding, isolation. I get more out of asking my kids what's interesting to them on the internet than I do out of interrogation. And that reflection piece, not just reflecting on myself, but asking my kids to reflect on what are you seeing? What did this bring up for you? What was happening when you saw this thing on the internet that made you uncomfortable? That's what creates the space for conversation. And finally, it's the redirect. So I work on a social media app, and I also don't want people on the app all the time because that's not a healthy way to build technology habits. What we want is to give people space to redirect. So when you pause, you think about what you're doing, and then you make a conscious choice about what you do next. And so much of the technology is built to stop you from making that conscious choice. And we reject that.
Amazing, Liz. So I think most people sort of bought into the thesis because they care very much about the next generation. So Gen Z, I think Shelby, you and I are the only Gen Z people up here, I think, at this point.
Clearly.
What can people do to really help protect the next generation as someone who's squarely in that age cohort?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing people can do is ask and not assume. I think so much of where the disconnect happens is based on your own experience, assuming what my experience is like. Technology has fully changed the way youth are understanding and receiving life. So I think when we ask and we don't assume about an experience, one, it opens me up to want to share. I think there's a large fear within Gen Z that if I share what is exciting to me and what is normal for my age group, that I'm going to be judged for it. So opening that door and just kind of being like, what's going on, instead of kind of taking something with an assumption. I think what I love so much about Promly is that that is kind of where the app lies. And I think that is what makes so many things great when we're really having that conversation about what I need and how the population as a whole can serve Gen Z.
Amazing. So Mark, I know you and Mark Zuckerberg are very close, inseparable. Basically. All kidding aside, what role should the platforms play in protecting young users? We just saw recently the first jury trial in LA where basically the jury opined unequivocally that it has an addictive quality. That is now not refutable. So they can't come back and just say we're neutral platforms. What role should they play? And you, of all people, in fact, I think I've met through you more angel parents and people who tragically have lost a child directly as a result of social media use. What role should the platforms be playing?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I appreciate you bringing up the KGM case, which just happened in Los Angeles, the courthouse in Los Angeles. Very pivotal case. Important to bring it up in the context of this question because it also shows that the social media platforms as of today, without any additional legislation, and this is subject to ongoing court appeal to be clear, but they have to operate under what's called a duty of care. They cannot be negligent in the design of their platforms as a matter of California law right now. And I think as this gets tested in other states, that'll prove true as well. They have a moral obligation to do that anyways. When we're talking about design and talking about either intentionally, recklessly, or negligently putting out features in the platforms that have a very reasonable, foreseeable risk of causing harm to a child, that is a real moral and ethical issue. And so we know from whistleblowers that they are engaging in that to maximize participation on their platform. They need to not do that. The other thing I'll add here too, you mentioned angel parents. I just came last night from DC where they were recognizing Social Media Victims Remembrance Day, and I stood with hundreds of parents who were able to make it. There are many thousands more across the country who lost their child to a social media related threat. And this is happening again on an ongoing basis. This list gets longer and longer each year. There is technology today that can send parents alerts when dangerous content comes across a child's social media platform. And it does everything, it can do everything that Liz was talking about in terms of allowing teens to use social media, preserving privacy, and sending alerts when a situation arises that puts a child in an imminent risk that they may not be able to deal with themselves. And because we see fatalities, because we see very serious harm, this type of what we call third-party safety software is life-saving. It exists today because some platforms have to allow access for safety software to work. Some allow it, and some tragically do not. And so we have legislation in Congress called Sammy's Law, named after Sammy Chapman, who died because he purchased drugs that happened to be poisoned with fentanyl through social media. We have Sammy's Law to require social media platforms to give families that choice to protect their children. So that is our number one legislative priority right now. We have a number of others it would take too much time to go into, but we do hope, and we think that's very consistent with the content creator community. It's something that I think everyone here should be able to support. You could go to sammyslaw.org to learn more information. Thank you.
Your organization does unbelievable work, Mark. Let's talk, Jen, about the parents for a second. Talking about the kids. Parents modeling good, healthy digital behavior. Because I've seen, the father saying, Johnny, you put that thing down. It's absurd when you're not modeling what you're trying to impart to your children.
We can talk just about adults in general. I said, somebody was asking me, Jen, who do you care most about? And I said, well, yes, I care about youth. Obviously, I'm always championing their voice in as many ways as I possibly can. But truth be told, I'm really concerned about my 87-year-old mom because she's on Facebook 24/7 and she can't get off of it. And, when I look when you say, parents modeling for kids, I think we all have to take a hard look and say, what are we doing to have healthy relationships with our phones? It doesn't necessarily have to be social media, but technology in general. What are we doing as parents to stop and connect and to really make eye contact, let's say, even with the people that we care about, the people that we love, right? So many times, we're isolated and we're not taking the steps to get out of our comfort zone. We're asking kids many times too, I think the biggest thing I hear from kids is, you're asking me to disconnect from my friends, right? Are you going to disconnect from your friends? Or that's a really big ask. And so I do think, kind of like Shelby was saying, please, don't assume. Let's work cross generations to really hear what kids are feeling like they need. My feeling is, even as a therapist, the thing that I learn the most is I learn way more by listening to my clients about what they need. And the first rule of therapy is always start where your clients are at. Well, my clients are on their phones. Well, I want to understand that, right? And then I want to figure out and strategize what's actually going to be helpful for them. Well, I'm not going to know that unless I actually work truly alongside of them to figure that out.
So it's interesting. We're talking about kids, we're talking about parents. Liz, your platform, correct me if I'm wrong, has a very broad spectrum in terms of age cohorts. Do you see the different styles and interaction between, say, Gen Z and others?
Yes, absolutely. And I would say that one of the benefits we have is we do see this cross-generational use. And what we have started to launch with Divine is a approach we call Divine Family. Because what we want to encourage is families to explore how they use social media together. One of the most joyful things that I have seen on Divine is a father and a son who make videos together. And they are modeling this wonderful behavior of doing something together that is social and is also creating media. And they don't make videos all the time. So when I see what we're able to do with creating a space for parents and their kids to explore how to build these habits together, just as Jen was saying, we have to model the behavior first and foremost, and then we have to help our youth as they come into their own with their agency to recognize that their agency, their privacy, and their safety are not mutually exclusive.
Super. Shelby, you represent, as we said, really the target audience. Before I ask you this question, I want to tell you a fact. In Greenville, North Carolina, we did a little focus group, about 2,000 people, which is statistically generalizable. It's a big enough sample. We asked a binary question to these kids. This is going to freak you out. Would you rather be famous or happy? What do you think they said?
Famous.
Every single kid said famous. Then I knew we had a problem. So I'm asking you as a Gen Z, Do you think most Gen Z are happy? And if not, why not? Just a small, but superficial question.
I think we're getting to the point where happy feels like a concept and not something actually attainable. So I think in that
Sorry, not
not
attainable.
attainable. Yeah, I think famous TikTok makes you famous in 2 seconds.
Right.
You post one video that could blow up. It feels attainable.
I mean, Mark's dancing on TikTok is terrific. It's unbelievable.
yeah.
Negative views.
So I think it's easier to pick the attainable option versus this abstract concept of happy. What is happy? I think as we become more digital, that gets further and further away, and this idea of being famous gets closer and closer, and that comes with the money, that comes with the notoriety, which all could seem like it is happy because happy is so abstract.
So let me build on that. Mark, you've been in the hot seat for a while. What do you see in the mental health landscape that's changed over the last decade?
I mean, that's an excellent question. So, as I said on that first response, we are seeing kind of a robust, really significant body of research that's showing that social media is a contributor to adverse mental health outcomes. Over the last decade, what's happened, of course? So, kind of early 2010s, we have seen really a revolution in how teens and tweens are communicating, spending their time, entertaining themselves, getting their information. Around 2014 to 2016, we saw the introduction of engagement maximizing algorithmic feeds and other features as well. When we look at the statistical indicators of mental health outcomes from that time, we see a lot of really stark, concerning numbers. And again, for the sake of time, I'll just go into one as an example. But if you go back to 2011, we saw a suicide ideation rate among girls specifically at 19%. If you fast forward to 2021, that jumped up to 30%, which is a staggering increase for suicidal ideation. And so 1 in 8 of those girls actually.
Can you repeat those dates again? In
19% in 2011, 30% in 2021, which is really a staggering jump in numbers. Now, timing alone does not prove causation, of course, it's one data point. But if you look again back to that robust body of research, we have hundreds of studies showing correlation, longitudinal studies, and we have newer experimental studies as well. OFSMS, my organization, in partnership with UCLA School of Research, with a substantial data set of over 40,000 students, has again replicated the correlation between increased social media use and a decrease in life satisfaction. And you don't just have to take my word for it on the concerns. The Surgeon General issued a public health advisory in 23, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Psychological Association, the American Academy of Child Psychologists, Canadian Pediatric Organization, Worldwide Health Organization, all have formally expressed their concern on this issue and urged intervention. And so I think that we can, on the mental health side, take a safety-first approach, and we need to start working with youth, with policymakers, with educators, parents, and finding and implementing interventions as soon as we can, because I think the harm is very real here.
Well, and I'll also just add to that. And one thing, I guess, I come at this, I never had a tech background, right? But kids would say to me very clearly, as I was watching the teen suicide rates go from 3 in 6 years to 6 to 9 every single year in the literally 25-mile radius where I treat kids. So from 2009 to 2019, that 6 to 9 every year was a massive increase. And then at 2020, we landed at 15 in the same exact geographic area. And kids would look at me and they would say, Jen, adults created social media. They're literally watching it kill kids. Why are the adults not stepping up to fix it? Do they just not care about us? Are we just some kind of experiment generation? And it was at that time when it's like, well, somebody must be stepping up. Like there must be, I would say to kids, I'm sure like my friends work at Facebook. They're good moms. Like they're not going to let this happen to you. Let me help you with your anxiety. Like we'll teach you some tools. Not really hearing them and not seeing what was actually happening. And I'm going to add one more thing. Kids, their brains are programmed, rewards outweigh consequences by 14 times in the teenage brain. So access to suicide means, which are very accessible with obviously the internet, but definitely with algorithms, with lots of different platforms. I won't name them, just I don't know who I'm going to upset here, but part of even why we got involved in policy was that I was seeing directly hearing from kids who were suicidal and seeing that the means has changed. And so they were saying, well, Jen, I'm just going to go on YouTube. That's how I'm going to figure out how to kill myself. Well, that's a major change. And so, again, when we're the adults in the room, and yet nobody is saying to these kids, you matter enough for us to do something different. That's really what prompted us to found Promly. That's why you guys did Divide. I mean, we have to be able to come up with better solutions to use technology in a more thoughtful way.
And if
Just-
I can just piggyback on that, speaking from the app perspective, we have made very conscious decisions about how we're going to be funded and how we're going to operate as a public benefit corporation first and as partially as a nonprofit, because we want to put people over profit.
Mhm.
We have such a mismatch in the incentives and the desired outcomes. And it's driving behaviors that are so detrimental. And to choose to reject that is really, from a technologist perspective, to walk alone. And I commend Promly. I mean, it takes a lot of courage and bravery to step out of this treadmill and say, no, we reject these models and we're not going to let these profit-driven motives dictate our behavior because we know it's wrong.
Mhm.
We want to promote agency. We want there to be joy, and we believe there can be. And so we don't believe that there's a choice between doing good and doing well as a binary.
Let me ask you guys, we'll do it, across from Shelby up to you, Liz. Here's a internal struggle that creators are going through. I discussed this once with Jimmy, and I've discussed it with other people. It's real, and they're at the point right now where they feel completely conflicted. They know that if they shout out or post something, that millions of people are going to be impacted. They also know that content can have a very deleterious impact on the health and well-being of the. What's the moral responsibility of creators? What's the responsibility of people who are incredibly talented and yet realize that there's sometimes a conflict between doing what's right and doing what is lucrative?
Yeah, I think my first thought comes, take creator out of it, right? We're all people.
Okay.
We're all trying to do better for the next people. So I think when we start to say these creators should be held at the standard, we all need to be held at the standard.
Good point.
We are the people making the change. And I think that's regardless of creator, of
Very good point.
whatever. We are the people making change. And I think when we take creator out of it, that's when we're going to see some real change.
Mark?
Yeah, I think while this whole issue has complexity, that question, I think, has simplicity. And the question that creators need to ask themselves is the content that I'm putting out, will it reasonably cause harm?
Yep.
Reasonably, in a foreseeable way, cause harm to a user out there, a group of users? And if the answer is yes, you cannot put out that content, and that is just an ethical, moral standard that we need to abide by. I think content creators have a lot of responsibility. I think by and large, we are looking at content creators who are putting out productive, responsible, uplifting content and are aware of this responsibility.
Yep.
We also have content creators that know their impact.
Yep.
They know what's happening and they leverage that for clout, and they're putting out harmful content, challenges, pranks, disinformation, that is causing real substantial harm because kids are seeing this, and we do not have an effective age assurance
Yep.
system at the moment. We actually have 40% of 8 to 12-year-olds by national survey. We see a lot more who are on social media and know all of the popular content creators. And so there is a responsibility here. This is why we have an initiative called Influencers for Safety, to help teach influencers about the harms that are out there and have influencers work together, because these other content creators that are putting out dangerous content are creating a bad reputational risk for
Yep.
all of the productive, positive content creators. It is not fair, it is harmful, and I think we can work together to help solve this problem.
Jen?
I mean, listen, I'm going to say the same thing. I do think we all have a responsibility. My experience in working with creators is that they're super impact driven, and maybe that's just the people I surround myself with. But when I have the conversations and when we all work together, both on the policy landscape as well as on the, just messaging landscape and providing support for each other, there's huge amounts of gains and impact. And honestly, I have yet to meet somebody who hasn't been sort of all in
Yep.
for being helpful for humanity. Again, maybe the people I surround myself with. So, I think we can, again, trajectory wise, really look at a roadmap to build more of these partnerships and to validate each other in the process.
Beautiful. Liz, and then I want to do another quick roundup.
I think there's also a reframe that has to happen. And Mark, I know you and I have talked about this, focusing on how can we be kinder, as opposed to framing it as how can I not cause harm? If I'm a creator, how can I be more creative? How can I create more joy? How can I create more goodness? In the research that I have been privileged to do with teens, I have seen that when you prompt a teen with, is this kind? How could this be kinder? They choose to do it.
Yeah, very true.
And it's that is at the core of our humanity. And so we absolutely have an opportunity to encourage that and frame it as how do you create more good in the world? Because that's what our creators are in an incredible position to do.
That's a perfect segue. I'm going to go around from Shelby to you, Liz. I'm wiring you tomorrow $1 billion US. Let's say money is not an issue. How can you possibly, what proactive steps would you do to curtail the biggest global pandemic that's ever hit this world?
No pressure.
Yeah, no pressure at all. Cameras are rolling, 1.7 billion live
Go
streaming.
Shelby.
I think I would make sure that there is a person of Gen Z in every major corporation. I think
100%.
without that, it's impossible.
Excellent answer.
Go girl.
Good answer with AI coming. No, I appreciate the question. This is an issue of resources, right? Especially for the work that we do. The Organization for Social Media Safety does education. We're in K through 12 schools across the U.S. We do research with UCLA School of Education. We do advocacy work from Congress to state capitals to local school boards. And we work with safety software companies on a pro bono basis to improve their product. All of that takes resources. With $1 billion and kind of on much less of a budget there, we are protecting hundreds of thousands of kids directly a year and millions globally. With $1 billion, we could do a substantial amount of work in making sure that children are not harmed by social media.
Jen,
Listen, there's a lot we could do with $1 billion.
would you take a vacation for a weekend?
Yeah, you and me, definitely. A lot we could do with $1 billion. I guess I look at it like I think it's a multifaceted approach, and I think we need more of a social movement.
Yep.
And that movement involves not just like new technology that really uses technology for good. Shameless plug for Promly. We actually build in different mental health tools. The phone turns into a biofeedback device, reads your heart rate, coaches you through how to disrupt the parasympathetic nervous system. No, we don't sell anybody's data. We work with all the major mental health innovation leaders where mental health apps would otherwise sit on shelves, and we make them accessible through grants through our nonprofit so that we can reach underserved populations globally. So with $1 billion, yeah, I would go totally around the world with underserved populations, but even developing countries where they haven't made the same mistakes that we've made. We already know what we know from some of these outcomes. We have the ability to actually impact these developing nations in powerful ways to really make them shine. And so that would be where I would go with it.
I'm going to ask you just to wrap, and then I have to give a public announcement at the end. So you're up $1 billion in your bank account.
$1 billion is going to go toward education and coalition building because we have to bring together youth and parents and educators and health service providers and policymakers and technologists and researchers. There are so many stakeholders here, and we don't talk to each other. We don't work together. That, to me, is building the village that will make us stronger, more creative, more joyful, and kinder.
I want to say two thank yous. Firstly, every one of the folks up here who I know reasonably well, I really believe are the unsung heroes in a struggle which is ubiquitous. Every single family in one shape or form is impacted. I know at least the folks up here well enough to know that they could be in a fancier position, a more lucrative position, but they've chosen to take the road less traveled, and I think that deserves a round of applause right there. I also want to thank VidCon. VidCon has taken a very courageous leadership stand to embrace this global mental health pandemic in a very, very serious way. So I'm just going to give you a cryptic heads up as the clock ticks down to 0, that this is not a one-off situation. We're looking at this being an initiative, a beginning of a momentum where we're going to go to other countries. There are a lot of ideas, and hopefully every single person will look back at their lives at VidCon 2026 as a tipping point of the beginning of people before profits. Thank you very much for being with us. Recording will be available later. Thank you.